Peter Pan and Wendy is officially out on Disney+. To say that the reception of the movie has been underwhelming would be an understatement. While critics received the movie slightly better, overall most seem to agree that Peter Pan and Wendy failed to impress. While everyone knows that critic scores are not the most accurate, it does still give a pretty interesting insight into what people think. On Rotten Tomatoes, the movie has a critic score of 67%. The audience score, on the other hand, is much worse. With a score of only 20% among fans, it paints a very dark picture in terms of what most people really think. Now, I went through both the critic and audience scores to get a better understanding as to why this movie failed. In most cases, the reasons for not liking the movie are vastly different. One thing that did surprise me is the honesty of the so-called professional reviewers. Usually, they would gobble up a movie like this. However, this time around, a lot of mainstream outlets were a lot more ruthless. It was definitely a bit more refreshing to see. However, as I dug a bit deeper into the reasons why some critics disliked the movie, it became clear that the reasons behind the criticism were a bit more sinister. No matter what, Peter Pan and Wendy was doomed to fail from the start. Most critics slamming the movie seems to agree on one thing. The main plot of the movie did not change enough. Most were expecting David Lowery to make significant changes to the plot of the movie. Right now we are living in the age of remakes. Every single classic and not so classic is getting a reboot. Not wanting to be outdone, Disney has been at the forefront of this new trend. When it comes to remakes, there has always been a very rigorous debate. This debate revolves around respecting original source material. I am sure by this point you have heard of the term reimagining or updating for a modern audience. When you hear those terms, it is usually a good idea to turn around and run as far away as you possibly can. Those terms usually just mean, we are going to use the name of the IP while changing everything about what made the original great. For some reason though, critics seem to gobble this type of thing up. The more they deviate from the source material, the more they fall in love with a movie or series. Now, there is definitely a debate to be had about adding to the existing source material. However, the changes that critics demand are usually more of a social and political nature. For this movie, critics acknowledge that some significant changes were made to the movie. However, those changes were not enough. Most were expecting an even bigger spin to the movie. Since they did not deviate far enough, critics are not happy with the movie. While critics did not like Peter Pan and Wendy, fans feel even more strongly. As always though, there is a massive gap in terms of how the critics think and how the audience think. Most of the fan critique for this movie revolved around the changes that were made. While critics think they did not make enough changes to the movie, fans think they went too far. From the beginning, most did not like the fact the film was called Peter Pan and Wendy. Since 1953, it has always been a Peter Pan story. Wendy, on the other hand, is more of a side character. Now, in all fairness, there are plenty of Peter Pan characters that have received their own shine over the last few decades. Tinkerbell, to her credit, has received plenty of standalone movies. Captain Hook himself has been given the opportunity to shine without Peter. Giving Wendy that same opportunity is not the worst idea. How you execute it though is a whole different story. In addition to this, there are other changes that fans also did not like. The Lost Boys are no longer boys. They are now a much more diverse group that portrays much more inclusivity. While critics loved this change, fans thought that it was an empty pandering gesture designed to only cater to the woke. Personally, the change did not bother me. The movie is guilty of far worse sins in terms of storytelling. Many feel that this movie failed to capture the Disney magic. The term sad and depressing was used a lot to describe the movie. Peter Pan and Wendy has a slow pace and the main plot of the story does not feel like a Disney child story at all. In all fairness, Peter Pan and Wendy never stood a chance. No matter what direction they chose to go in, the movie was always going to fail. In the eyes of many, the movie deviated too far away from the original work. For others, the movie simply did not go far enough. Unfortunately, Disney was in a very unwinnable position. People are tired of old IPs getting modern remakes. Books, movies, series, nothing is safe anymore. For many, classic IPs should stay in the past. For others, there is always room to improve past work. Personally, I think adding to the lore of a classic story can actually lead to great things. However, it only works for stories with extensive plots. You also need to have enough respect for the original work in order to add your own spin. In theory, it can work for stories like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and Harry Potter. Sometimes, the execution will be great and people will love the new spin on things. Other times, the changes will make no sense and people will hate it. Based on what I have seen, when the original cast or writers is involved, things usually work out. People seem to love shows like Cobra Kai on Netflix. They do a great job telling a new story while also staying true to the original. The same can be said for the new Chucky series. However, shows like Rings of Power and even The Witcher have been blasted. Shows like The Mandalorian, at least in the first few seasons, did a great job telling an all-new Star Wars story. The point is, if executed properly, there is actually room for retellings, extensions, and new stories to existing lore. The problem right now is that these remakes are happening too often. Twilight is getting a remake. Harry Potter is getting a remake. Hollywood no longer wants to make changes to new IPs. Disney is particularly guilty of this. Almost all of their future projects are remakes. While there can be a certain level of excitement seeing a classic from the 70s or 80s getting modernized, all of that excitement is now dead. A couple of years ago I was so extremely excited for a new Gremlins movie. When I heard the news of a new Beetlejuice, I was equally excited. Now, I am terrified of the word remake. Unfortunately, this is a trend that will be going nowhere.